Coming in at number 10, we have the time Peter grew and then lost 4 additional arms, literally making him an 8-limbed freak. This event took place during a period of time in which being Spider-Man had brought Peter nothing but pain, with Gwen Stacy's father having recently passed away, and Gwen believing Spider-Man to be responsible. Thus, Peter decided to get rid of his double life by developing a serum to remove his spider abilities. Unfortunately, testing serums on yourself rarely works out in the Marvel Universe, and Peter's spider powers are amplified to the point that 4 additional arms burst forth out of his body. And while Spider-Man would eventually be able to balance out his life and lose the additional limbs, it's still a bizarre tale of body horror that Peter is lucky to have gotten out of unscathed. Coming in at number 9, we have getting trampled by the Rhino in the video game Spider-Man Miles Morales. This game is one of my favorites of the last couple years, and it opens with both Peter Parker and Miles Morales working together as Spider-Men to try and transport the Rhino safely to the supervillain prison. Unfortunately, the Rhino breaks free, and the opening tutorial of the game is trying to chase the villain down and stop his rampage. Unfortunately, since this is just the tutorial, Peter Parker does most of the fighting and winds up getting his butt kicked, getting hit with attacks that should definitely have shattered at least half the bones in his body. Luckily, Miles is eventually able to save the day by discovering his Venom Blast ability, but it's still a wonder how Spidey is able to even stand after all of that pummeling. Coming in at number 8, we have Firebrand burning Peter Parker alive. During another period where Spider-Man was a bit off his game, he got into a fight with the usually low-level villain Firebrand. Unfortunately, Spider-Man's taunts during the fight pushed Firebrand over the edge, causing him to fully unleash his power and blow up a city block. The resulting explosion was shown in graphic detail to burn both Peter's costume and his flesh, and the only reason he was able to survive without permanent scarring was due to the quick intervention of a hospital that usually only treats supervillains. I guess one perk of getting most of your face burnt off is that the doctors won't know exactly who they're healing. Nicely handled, Spider-Man. Coming in at number 7, we have the time Spider-Man had to take on the entire Sinister Six at once in the PlayStation 4 Spider-Man video game. After a breakout at the supervillain prison, The Raft, Peter is faced with his worst nightmare when he's surrounded by the combined team of the Rhino, the Vulture, Scorpion, Electro, and Mr. Negative, who are more than enough to weaken Spider-Man before the arrival of the leader of the Sinister Six, Dr. Octopus, who up until this point had been a friend and mentor to this universe's Peter Parker. The betrayal cuts Peter deep, and his wounded body is thrown into New York Harbor, only barely surviving by holding on to a floating oil drum. This beatdown was so bad, Peter eventually needed a specialized costume to be strong enough to go up against Doc Ock once more. Coming in at number 6, we have the time that Spider-Man was tortured by the dark ancient sorcerer Coulomb Goth. During a comic event that saw the entire city of Manhattan transformed into an alternate medieval fantasy version, Spider-Man was one of the few heroes who remembered the world as it truly was. As punishment for rebelling against Coulomb Goth's rule, this version of Spider-Man was tortured and put on display for all of Coulomb Goth's enemies to see. And while Spider-Man would eventually be restored once Coulomb Goth was defeated and reality reverted back to normal, it's still incredibly disturbing to see one of Marvel's greatest heroes being put in such a violent situation. Coming in at number 5, we have the time Peter Parker became a literal spider monster. We've already covered a storyline on this list where Peter grew some extra limbs, but during an event in which the concept of the spider totems was first introduced into the Marvel mythology, Peter Parker found himself transformed into a gigantic spider-human hybrid, with horrifying mandibles and a hunger for human flesh. Eventually, this creature would appear to die and then be reborn as a fresh Peter Parker, now possessing organic web shooters. While this may have just been a really convoluted storyline to make Spidey's web status the same as the Tobey Maguire movies, it's still a body horror storyline that makes my skin crawl. Coming in at number 4, we have the time that Spider-Man lifted an entire building and lived to tell the tale. In one of the most iconic, defining moments for the entire character, Spider-Man found himself trapped under the rubble of a collapsed building, with water rapidly filling the area as well. In order to save the life of his Aunt May, Peter had to lift the weight of the entire building off of his back. This is the pivotal moment where Spider-Man showed just how strong he could be when the situation called for it, and just how far he was willing to push his body to save the lives of the people he loves. Something that would go on to become a defining feature of the character. But seriously, Peter, you should probably get someone to spot you the next time you lift something that heavy. Coming in at number 3, we have the time that Deadpool accidentally killed and then resurrected Spider-Man twice. After a complicated series of events led to Deadpool being hired to kill his friend Spider-Man and being convinced that Peter had turned to evil, the Merc with a Mouth shot Peter Parker in the head unexpectedly at his apartment. This would be a pretty anticlimactic end to the spectacular Spider-Man, however, and Deadpool eventually convinced his demon girlfriend of the time to resurrect his buddy, because comic books are weird like that. In a comedic twist, Deadpool would shoot Peter again after briefly thinking that he had once more turned to evil, but eventually everyone wound up alive and safe, even if this would continue to be one of the weirdest situations in Spider-Man's very weird history. Coming in at number 2, we have the so-called death of the Ultimate Spider-Man. In the comic book event that would lead to the debut of Miles Morales, the Peter Parker of the Ultimate Marvel Universe had to die before a new Spider-Man could rise. In a final battle against his nemesis, the Green Goblin, the teenage Peter Parker protected his family against Norman Osborn's relentless and crazed attacks, even after he'd already been mortally wounded by an assassin's bullet. While at the time this seemed like a tragic and dramatic end to the Ultimate Peter Parker, it would eventually be revealed that he actually survived this intense battle, as the Oz formula that gave him his spider abilities also functionally made this Peter Parker immortal. Maybe it's just a weird comic book retcon, but the fact that Peter survived so many injuries is truly mind-blowing, and I can't wait to see where the Ultimate Universe takes us next. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have Spider-Man's head-crushing defeat in the original Infinity Gauntlet event. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we may have all gotten our hearts broken by that classic, "I don't want to go, Mr. Stark," but the battle for the Infinity Gauntlet in the comics may have been even more brutal to Peter Parker than we'd ever want to see on the big screen. In the comics, Peter is able to briefly get the upper hand on Thanos with some web attacks to the face, but is then viciously beaten by Thanos' lady companion, Taraxia, who is shown to kill the wall crawler by attacking him with a rock. Pretty brutal for a cosmic Marvel event. And while by the end of Infinity Gauntlet all of the killed heroes would be restored, this might just be one of the most bone-crushing losses ever suffered by Spider-Man.
Number 10, drowning. We talked about Wolverine's battle with Tiger Shark on part 1 of this list, but later on in that same series, there's also a time when Wolverine/Patch seems to have been adrift in the ocean for quite some time and washes up later on shore alive. This almost implies that if you take Wolverine out of the water, he could potentially recover from drowning. So you could really only kill him by drowning if you kept him under there. Either that or he managed to stay afloat long enough to keep his brain alive before passing out, getting tossed around some more, and then washing up on shore later. So perhaps he's only been passed out for a few minutes. It seems as though he has suffered some brain damage, at least, from this underwater journey, as Logan also suffers from amnesia when he first wakes up. It takes a bullet to the head to loosen his memories and make him remember why he came there in the first place. Unfortunately, by then, it's a little too too late. His plan was to warn the people of the village he arrived at, but by then they were already under attack. To read this whole story and the account of his drowning and washing up ashore, you need to check out the Lazarus Project story arc from the 1988 series. Near the end of issue 27 is where he dives into the water, and then we see him wash up without his memory in issue 28. Number 9, stabbed too fast. Technically, this killed Wolverine, but in the same issue in which he died, he was right back up and at him again, so I think we can still count it as a survival moment, because he recovers. He did come back from it, and ultimately he did survive. Also, this death is pretty ridiculous, which is also why I feel like it needs to be mentioned. In issue number 20 of the 2003 Wolverine series, during the Enemy of the State story arc, in the same issue in which he was introduced, Gorgon kills Wolverine by stabbing him real fast. He stabs so fast, Wolverine's healing factor can't even keep up. Okay. Wolverine dies, but in the same issue is resurrected and returns, now an agent of Hydra. And of course, welcome to Enemy of the State. An iconic story, but one with kind of a weird start. And friends, before I move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more Wolverine lists, boy oh boy do I want to give them to you. In fact, I think we could even do a part 3 of just ridiculous things that Wolverine has survived. So let us know you love it by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, attempted decapitation. There was a time when Wolverine was nearly decapitated by Conan the Barbarian himself, and still managed to keep on walking. His near decapitation broke a sword, and then of course was later covered by his hand on the back of his neck, for censorship reasons I imagine, so you can't quite see it, but it did happen. And this did happen in a what if, so it's considered alternate reality, I should mention, but I still think it's pretty impressive and wild that Wolverine tussled with Conan, got dealt the brunt of his decapitative force, and managed to survive it. And just get back up like it was nothing. Also, I feel like Conan would know when he's pretty much decapitated someone, because I feel like he probably does that a lot, so he literally was like, I gave him the whole decapitation swing, and I don't know, he's probably dead. Number 7, weaponized healing factor. When facing the Omegas in the 2010 Uncanny X-Force series in issue 26, Wolverine had his whole healing factor turn against him, being weaponized by Omega Red with Omega Blue and Omega Black in tow. The Omegas. Omega Red basically makes it so that Wolverine's immune system is working on overdrive, basically being tricked into thinking that his whole body is like a disease that needs to be fought off, so his immune system starts attacking all his organs, oh no. As a result, he becomes a giant mass of pus, decay, and inflammation. Wolverine's heart struggles against the internal attack, and in the end, his only solution to surviving is to cut himself open and basically let all the infectious bits that are there internally fall out of him. It's quite grotesque, but it does seem to work. And of course, he does survive. Just like him being like, I guess I gotta just cut myself open. I'm like, oh, okay. Alrighty then. Gross. Number 6, actual decapitation. In Ultimate Wolverine vs. Hulk, issue number 5, Wolverine ends up getting full-on decapitated by S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury. This, of course, is in the Ultimate Universe, as it is an Ultimate comic. So it isn't 616 Wolverine, but it's still Wolverine. Wolverine of 1610, but still. Fury tells Wolverine that they are holding his body in an undisclosed location, and reveals that they ran some experiments on Wolverine's head and body, and have learned that his mutation seems to be more about survival than healing. How is he able to breathe without a body as a decapitated head? Apparently, his head has adapted to use his skin to breathe instead. So Ultimate Wolverine can actually survive decapitation and a slew of other things, just no problemo. He could survive almost anything in the Ultimate reality. Almost anything. Still dies in that reality, so you know. Number 5, escape velocity. We've seen Wolverine able to navigate the vacuum and coldness of space without proper equipment and survive pretty reasonably. But how about a hit so hard that it got him up to escape velocity, blasting him into orbit? Well, surprisingly, that wasn't much of a problem for Wolverine either. We see that happen in issue 108 of the first X-Men volume. Here he runs into a little fella named Jaff. But like Wolverine, just because he might be smaller in stature does not mean he is a pushover. Jaff punches Wolverine so hard he launches him up into space, but thanks to his healing factor, he manages to still survive that hard hit. And survive space. I mean, I think it's pretty cool that Wolverine can just survive space. That's nuts. Number 4, fall back from space. I like space, so I'm gonna talk about space some more. In Return of Wolverine issue number 5, Logan goes up against Persephone. Not wanting to be her puppet and not interested in the seeming fresh start she's offering him after bringing him back from the dead, he decides to escape their conversation and finds out what her master plan is. When he learns it has to do with basically mind controlling potentially the whole planet, he decides to intervene. The last satellite to be removed that could allow Persephone to take control of up to a few million people at the time happens to be the station he is on. So he decides the best course of action is to also disable that, bringing it crashing down to Earth. Logan himself had just survived being hit with a poisonous gas and jumping out into the vacuum of space. And even after that, he still manages to survive re-entry on a crashing station that would get impossibly hot, like really hot in there. The station lands in the ocean with Logan literally on fire as he slams into it. As a charred and burnt crisp, he emerges from the water and is fortunately brought to shore by some very shocked but obviously helpful fishermen. Hopefully they did have beer for you, Wolverine. Number 3, launched into the sun. During the dawn of X period of the current modern X-Men books, back in issue number 4 of House of X, Wolverine suffered what would appear to be a very permanent death in the fight against Orcus. A team was assembled to take out the mother mold that Orcus was building up in space, a massive mother mold, before it could be completed and come online. Wolverine was the one to deal that final blow to it. Nightcrawler teleported him to outside the station where the mother mold was docked, sacrificing his own life in the process. It was then up to Logan, who slashed through the dock, freeing the mother mold from the station so that he could launch it into the sun, and of course him with it. In current X times though, we have resurrection protocols on our side. Yay, resurrection protocols, which allow fallen mutants to be returned to Krakoa. So while Wolverine did die from this, he was soon returned via resurrection protocols back to life. And for those who are wondering, the returning of his adamantium bonded skeleton each time is actually all thanks to Proteus, which fortunately means it's probably a lot less painful than other adamantium bonding processes that Logan has had to suffer through, because Proteus can just be like, I warp reality, now you have adamantium. Of course, he can only do that because that's how Wolverine was before, so he can't just like make adamantium, just to be clear. He's not an adamantium making machine, okay guys? Number 2, adamantium bonding process. On part 1 of this list, we talked about when Wolverine has had the adamantium ripped from his body, and namely his skeleton. But how about just getting the adamantium in the first place? The adamantium bonding process is notoriously dangerous, and there are many test subjects who have come before and after Logan who simply did not survive it. Now, consider that Wolverine hasn't just had the adamantium bonded to his skeleton one time, but actually has had it bonded to him multiple times in his life. Considering how painful and deadly this process is, it's pretty amazing that Wolverine was able to survive this, even with his healing factor, and that he has been through it more than once in his lifetime. He's also gone through the adamantium bonding process before without even emerging with it bonded to him, rejecting said adamantium. That's multiple big ouches, bub. I can't imagine going through it and then just not even having adamantium at the end of that. That would suck. Number 1, burned up by the sun. Yep, the sun death has happened more than once, but the sun is pretty ultimate, so I felt like I had to talk about it again. I mean, it is a very permanent way to kill Wolverine when you think about it. In New X-Men issue 148, Wolverine has a moment where he's finally ready to say goodbye to everything. He prepares to throw himself into the sun with Jean Grey's body in tow. This is after Jean and Wolverine cannot find a way out of the trap that they've fallen into and are basically about to be launched into the sun. They do their best to find a way out of this predicament, but unfortunately, they can't seem to escape, and it's just getting hotter and hotter in there. When they both seem resigned to their fate, Logan decides to try and make the experience less painful for Jean by running her through with his claws, because that's what Wolverine does. Then, holding her body, he greets the sun as they arrive at their final destination. However, in issue 150 of New X-Men, it's revealed that Wolverine and Jean actually survived this, because the Phoenix consciousness was awoken by Jean's death. She actually needed to die in order to tap into the Phoenix Force and resurrect, rising from the ashes quite literally. She was able to res Logan again and create and pilot a ship construct in order to bring them back to Earth. So he even survived walking into the sun. That's bananas. Gotta love all those reses just saving your butt.
In at 10, Rainbow Raider. Rage is never really a good thing to suppress. Trust me, I've had my fair share of suppressed emotions, but eventually everything you feel will come boiling to the surface and it will be worse than before. This was demonstrated in the first CW crossover between Arrow and the Flash called Flash vs. Arrow, where Barry gets whammied by Rainbow Raider and starts getting pretty pissed. So mad in fact that it's kind of like the DC TV version of Bully Maguire. No matter, I'm honestly surprised that the rage just didn't kill Barry or cause him to go so insane that someone had to kill him. I mean, like, obviously they wouldn't, that would never be the case, but still, like, in a realistic scenario, or as realistic as we can get with superpowered beings, he would in my mind have gotten himself killed at some point during this altercation. If Reverse Flash wasn't stuck in 2014, I'm sure that he would have taken that opportunity to, like, you know, right in his chest. In at 9, Flashpoint, a timeline of Barry's own creation where his mother doesn't die and he thus doesn't become the Flash. Oh, and don't forget the fact that Aquaman and Wonder Woman are at war, because Barry's mom doesn't die. And at the very least in the animated movie, this resulted in them destroying the world, literally destroying the planet. Barry has to run back in time and stop himself from saving his mother, letting her die just so that he can save the planet. But in this case, Flash literally outruns the destruction of a globe, of a planet, and does so in order to let his mom die. Like, holy crap, that's insane. I don't know if I would have the strength to do that. So, to me, it's pretty ridiculous that Barry firstly survived the destruction of the world, and then survived having to sacrifice his mother. Both emotionally and physically surviving this is pretty damn impressive in my personal opinion. He should either have exploded with the rest of the world, or not been strong enough to sacrifice his mother. Like, either way, she dies, right? So, like, you might as well keep your father out of prison and give her, like, another decade of life, right? In at 8, Injustice. Barry siding with Superman and his regime during the beginning of Injustice is certainly one of the dumbest things he's done. I mean, Barry is faster than Superman, we've seen it many times. Barry left him in the dust at one point while trying to return to the Speed Force to sacrifice himself, saying that all their other races were for charity. So, siding with Superman doesn't really do much for you. It's not like he can catch you if you decide to join Batman's insurgency. And considering how you sacrificed your mother for this planet's survival, I'm sure that you'd have normally been against these ideals. I mean, he ended up agreeing with Shazam when he said that leveling cities was too far. And then that's when Barry decides to leave, after they've killed Billy. Why did you join in the first place? Bro, I don't get it. It makes no sense to me. If I were Superman, I would have just killed the Flash instantly, no matter what side he was on, because in reality, he's like the only one who could pose a threat to me. This also brings up another question. If Barry did the whole vibrating hand thing, so that like Reverse Flash does, so that he was the frequency of air, could he kill Superman? Or would he need like a Kryptonian glove? But like, he's air, right? So he should be able to pass through his chest. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think. And at 7, Savitar. The fact that Barry was able to survive the whole Savitar thing from the Flash season 3 will always escape me. I won't really ever understand how they ended up defeating a literal future version of Barry. I get how they managed to do it, but that was incredibly unrealistic, even for a show about a man who can run at the speed of light. Since technically Savitar would have known beforehand that the timeline was changing, since technically that should, in my brain at least, be how time travel works. Like, something changes, even if the current Barry doesn't know it yet, the Barry of the future would, because he would have to be from that time, right? That's just how it would work. But that's not how it works in the show, so that's fine, I guess. I don't see how it would ever have been possible to beat a future version of the Flash without this, but like, I know that he couldn't really die, since if he died, Savitar wouldn't be able to happen, despite his taunting in earlier episodes. I feel like that was just a way to prevent Barry from killing himself to stop him, but still, you shouldn't have won against Savitar, straight up. And at 6, DeVoe. The Flash Season 4 is not a favorite among fans. We all thought that we wanted a non-speedster as the main villain for a season. However, some dude who can literally think a lot was not what we had envisioned. But honestly, looking at what DeVoe was able to do, he was even more powerful than Savitar, who was literally a future version of Barry. Like, DeVoe could accurately predict every single thing that was going to happen, and the only way they could defeat him was by getting his wife on their side, getting Barry out of prison, and then somehow having Ralph take over his mind again from inside DeVoe, or like inside of his mind that DeVoe was controlling, and then not having any of the other powers that DeVoe had when he was in Ralph's body, which I don't understand. That whole ordeal, okay, was probably realistically impossible, but they somehow managed to pull it off. DeVoe should have been the end of Barry and the entirety of Team Flash. Like, as soon as Barry came out of the Speed Force, DeVoe should have killed him. Like, he made the bus metas and then he got out. Like, now you don't need to worry, right? You've offed him. Or like kill Barry as soon as like he did what you needed him to do. Like, as soon as he trained Ralph enough, you just go and you off Barry and then you take over Ralph. Most of the villains in these shows fail because they make like one stupid mistake. Okay? And this is why I'm the hero, because if I was the villain, I wouldn't make dumb mistakes and the world would have been destroyed already. Halfway through into number 5, Crisis on Infinite Earths. Technically speaking, the comic version of Barry Allen did survive Crisis on Infinite Earths, despite everyone believing him to be dead at the time, since he returned to the Speed Force after turning into the lightning bolt that ended up giving him his powers to begin with. But after transforming into pure lightning, traveling through time and space, and striking himself, Barry was sent into the Speed Force and then later escapes and comes back into our world in the Flash Rebirth storyline. So technically he survived the comic version of Crisis because he didn't die, he just transcended dimensions, I guess. But he also survived the Crisis from the CW crossover as well, since in this instance, despite like 6 seasons of us seeing a newspaper saying that our Barry vanishes, the Barry Allen from the 90s Flash series, aka Earth 90, was the one who ended up disappearing. Even though we literally saw a newspaper telling us about how our Flash died for 6 years. And no matter what, unless Barry didn't have his speed, that article stayed true. The byline changed, the articles around it changed, but the fact that Barry vanished in Crisis never did as long as he had his speed. So I don't know how he got out of that one. I guess like killing off one main character in that crossover was enough for the CW, but they would have just brought him back again. So like, what's the deal here? In 4, fought the Speed Force. Speaking of the CW, going from a crisis where every Earth gets destroyed, it's hard to make any other story seem worth it. However, the absolute crazy thing is that in the following season of The Flash, season 7, they upped the stakes by having Barry fight the literal Speed Force. A reborn Speed Force, might I add, since Barry ended up killing it when Oliver Queen as the Spectre brought out its full potential in order to save the multiverse. So, Barry and Iris end up essentially giving birth to another one, but like birth adjacent. But while they were rebirthing the Speed Force, they also created 3 other forces that were all evil for one time or another. And then they get all the other ones on their side, but the Speed Force wants to kill the other forces because she thinks that the other forces are trying to kill her. And the Speed Force looks like Barry's mom again, and then they even start calling her Nora. Honestly, it's a question as to how anyone watching this survived this storyline, let alone Barry fighting the literal thing that gave him his powers that he killed and then rebirthed and then was basically the father of, even though it looked like his mom. Season 7 definitely had some issues, but Barry should honestly not have won against the Speed Force. Getting close to the end in number 3, beating teleportation. There was a comic called The Human Race, where a group of cosmic gamblers who existed at the edge of the universe traveled around the cosmos and made bets with each other for fun. They were ultra mega powerful, so this was their only form of entertainment. They picked speedsters throughout the cosmos and then made them race each other in their bets, and then the speedster who lost got his or her home planet destroyed. In one such bet, Earth gets the attention of these cosmic gamblers, so Wally West, the fastest man on this planet, became the representative of Earth. During the race with a fellow speedster in the bet, Wally, who realized that the cosmic gamblers will never refuse a friendly wager, makes a bet with them that he will reach Earth first, despite the fact that the cosmic gamblers can teleport to any location in the cosmos instantly. This appeared to be a ridiculous gambit. The cosmic gamblers agree, and before the race even begins, using the kinetic energy of everyone on Earth and then some, Wally ran at what is called the trans-time velocity, fast enough to beat teleportation, which is basically 23 tridactylion times faster than the speed of light. Yeah, that's 23 with like 20 zeros, or 30 zeros, something like that. He reasonably should have lost and gotten the whole planet destroyed, because there's no way in hell that would happen, or he would have just disintegrated while running that fast. If Barry dies during Crisis, he should have died beating teleportation. Penultimately, in at number 2, Armageddon. The most recent episodes of The Flash started off season 8 with the Armageddon crossover, with Barry starting to believe he's going crazy and and in the future ends up creating Armageddon, destroying the entire world. However, this turns out not to be the case, since Reverse Flash is actually the one who creates Armageddon by turning himself into the Flash and then causing Barry as Reverse Flash to fix things. In order to fix things though, Barry must run at Mach 20, which is 20 times the speed of sound. But Thawne doing this behind him as well, in order to stop him, ends up tearing the world apart, at least until Barry fixes everything, causing the Reverse Flashpoint to no longer exist. Yeah, this was pretty ridiculous, but also a good story. Some of the best writing we've seen from the show in a while. That Reverse Flashpoint episode was awesome, but I am kind of partial to some alternate timeline episodes where we can see how things could have been, but honestly, I'm surprised Barry survived this, and for good reason. Because the episode before he ran back in time, Barry had Jefferson Pierce, Black Lightning, drain him of his speed nearly completely so that he couldn't hurt anyone again. He wanted to do it completely, but Jefferson stopped. But according to Thawne, Barry only had around 5% of his speed left, maybe less. So how could Barry have run at Mach 20? And how could Thawne, if he was truly the Flash in this timeline, not have caught up with him? That seems fairly ridiculous if you ask me. And finally, in at number 1, Black Flash. Black Flash is the Grim Reaper of the Speed Force, making his first appearance in The Flash Volume 2 number 138 in 1998. He was seen before the deaths of several speedsters including Barry Allen, Johnny Quick, and Bart Allen, and in essence, making him the speedster embodiment of death. In the CW Arrowverse, he was Hunter Zolomon after being caught by time wraiths, and was killed in Season 3's finale by Killer Frost when Black Flash came for Savitar since the Paradox had finally caught up with him. In the comics, he dies thanks to the combined efforts of multiple speedsters including Jesse Quick, Jay Garrick, and Max Mercury, and while he was able to race Black Flash to the end of time, causing death to have no meaning, which didn't matter for long since Barry Allen then returns in the Flash Rebirth storyline as the new Black Flash, unknowingly, until Professor Zoom takes over the title when his corpse is raised in the Blackest Night storyline. Either way, if this man is supposed to be the representation of death, and what inevitably comes for all speedsters, how was a Barry able to outrun him at any point? Or how was anyone able to outrun him? How was Wally able to outrun him? I don't know, okay? It shouldn't have happened.
Number 10, 28 opponents in 28 hours. During Scott Snyder's run on Batman, we also got to take a look back at Batman's past and his time training prior to being the beast of a man and hero that he is today. One such flashback saw a younger Bruce Wayne take on 28 opponents over the course of 28 hours. During a trial in Norway when he was just 24 years of age, Bruce refused to kill his opponents, so each hour a new one was added to the ring, or the pit, I guess. The hope was to get him to accept the fact that he would have to kill. Even when completely exhausted and in the face of potential defeat, Bruce refused. As a result, he still managed to be the victor in the end, because when more men were needed to continue the fight, they refused to enter the pit he was in and fight him. They were just too scared. Number 9, Broken Skull. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if Batman has broken every bone in his body. So it's not surprising that one of those bones happens to be in his skull. He was actually really lucky too. He only suffered a linear cranial fracture after a fight with Dr. Death during Scott Snyder's 0 Year story arc in issue 26 of the 2011 Batman series. Dr. Death knew a lot about bones and used his super strength and knowledge to try at one point to basically pull apart Bruce Wayne's skull. As he wrapped his hands around Bruce's head and proceeded to squeeze and pull, younger Bruce was saved by the appearance of Jim Gordon, who shot Dr. Death and successfully scared him off. While I'm sure Bruce Wayne here was only a few moments away from having his skull completely crushed or disassembled, he instead gets off with just a fracture. Still, a fracture is a break in the bone, so technically his skull was still at least slightly broken. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it, I mean, Batman has survived a lot of crazy stuff because plot armor, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, broken back. Breaking your back is a very severe injury, but not if you're Batman, and if you happen to know superpowered healers who can help speed along your recovery a bit. For this classic moment, you need to visit the story arc known as Batman Nightfall. A lot of people are amazed at Bruce's survival as a hero from his devastating defeat at the hands of Bane, who, yes, broke Batman's back over his knee. But in all honesty, if you have a spinal fracture, you can actually recover from that. Although the amount of time, treatment, and surgery needed to do so all depends on how severe that spinal fracture is. Bruce himself, even with all his money, was still out of commission for months, while he had Azrael take over for him as he focused on his own recovery. Eventually, he would recover and return. Not only that, but it seems as though this is an injury that doesn't often even resurface frequently, nor cause any kind of limitation on his ability to fight as Batman. Now, that is amazing. Number 7, leap of faith. Bruce's final act during his time of training was to base jump off of the top of Wayne Tower. Yeah, it was pretty intense, and I imagine a frightening final lesson. Bruce had experience training in base jumping before, but even then, his first attempt in Gotham at doing so, didn't go so well. In the first story in New Talent Showcase 2018, titled Batman Leap of Faith, we learned that Bruce did not land so smoothly from that jump and ended up with a dislocated elbow and a dislocated shoulder, a concussion, and some road rash. All in all though, he got off pretty easy. I'm just surprised he even managed to survive that. It's funny, but while I can't imagine Batman jumping off of Wayne Tower as like an established hero and full-grown adult, I cannot imagine anyone surviving that first jump, including like young Batman. I feel like that would be crazy. But I guess, how can you ever take more jumps without having first made it through your very first jump? Number 6, gas tank explosion. This one comes from the Batman animated series, from a really awesome episode too, The Man Who Killed Batman, episode 51 of the animated series. Here, Sid the Squid appeared to be the man who accidentally became responsible for Batman's death. During a scuffle, Sid falls over a roof ledge, and Batman reaches out to help him back up. However, part of the ledge then gives way and dings a propane gas tank which lays below, damaging it. As Batman pulls Sid up, he himself seems to lose his balance and falls down toward the tank just as it explodes, leaving only a tattered piece of his cape behind. While the explosion is large and deadly enough that it seems though no one would be able to survive, we later learn that Batman somehow swung to safety and faked his own death as part of his own plan to solve a crime. Number 5, buried alive. What would our part 2 be without some more times that Batman was buried alive? As I said on my part 1 of this list, Batman getting buried alive is so weirdly common in comics that we might actually be able to do a list about just the times he managed to survive that. This time he was buried alive in the DCAU in the direct-to-video animated film Justice League Doom. Doom is definitely inspired by the comic book story arc Tower of Babel, where Batman's defensive contingency plans for the rest of his League teammates, should they fly off the handle or turn evil, are basically used against him and the League. In Doom, the Legion of Doom, led by Vandal Savage, uses these to their advantage, and incapacitates the rest of the League after Batman is buried alive in his own father's coffin. Batman not only escapes, but also manages to help Cyborg save the fellow members of the League, as well as save the Earth from Savage's evil plan to eliminate 2/3 of its population. Number 4, fighting Superman. Really, when you think about the fact that Bruce Wayne is just a man, I mean an extremely skilled and intelligent and determined man, still just a man, it's impressive to think how he has gone toe-to-toe with so many superpowered opponents. During Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, one such superpowered opponent happened to be Superman himself. And this wasn't peak physique Batman either. This was Bruce's like an old Batman, coming out of retirement basically to take on Superman. Batman of course seemingly dies in his fight against Superman when he appears to suffer from a heart attack during their final fight. But of course, this was all a clever ruse. There was no heart attack. In reality, Batman just ingested poison to fake his death, and the kicker is that Clark actually knows that's what happened, but is, gonna be cool about it. Kinda makes you wonder if this whole fight actually needed to happen in the first place, really. And in Hush, a younger Batman doesn't just survive fighting a mind-controlled Superman commanded by Poison Ivy to kill him, he completely beats Supes, so there's also that. Number 3, Joker ruining his life. During the events of Joker War and leading up to it, Joker attempted to completely ruin Batman's life. And I feel like in many ways he kind of succeeded. He took all of Bruce Wayne's money and used it to turn Gotham into a war zone. Batman was struggling on all fronts here. Not only that, but leading up to the events of Joker War near the end of their Dark Design story arc in issue number 93 of the 2016 Batman series, Batman ended up fighting Deathstroke and being stabbed straight through the thigh. Ouch. Deathstroke was working for Joker, it turned out, and the Bat ended up being in pretty bad shape even going into that war because of this. Not only was his money and health taken from him, but Joker had Punchline also blast him with her own special brew of Joker venom, blended with some fear toxin, a little bit of Bane's venom juice, which left him wrestling with his sanity and struggling to discern reality for a good amount of the story. Number 2, just a torso and a head. In the dark multiverse, the worst kind of gruesome survival becomes possible. Although he be an alternate Batman and Bruce Wayne, he is still Batman and Bruce Wayne, so I think we can count this one even though it is an alternate version. I'm talking about the Batman from the Tales of the Dark Multiverse Batman Nightfall story. This Batman becomes known as the Broken. In this version of the Nightfall story arc conclusion, Night's End, Batman does not succeed in taking back his cape and cowl from Azrael, whom he loaned them to look after Gotham in his absence. Instead, Azrael wins that battle and becomes cemented as Gotham's champion, taking the name later of Saint Batman. Azrael removes Bruce's limbs, but keeps him alive, reduced to just his torso and his head. Here, Azrael also seems to enjoy somewhat visiting and tormenting Bruce, as he aims to prove that he is the better Batman between them. Eventually, Bruce escapes Azrael and goes on to become the Broken, a nanotech cyborg Batman whose torment actually shapes him into something much worse than his own captor in the end. Number 1, fighting the Reverse Flash. When it comes to fighting someone out of his power class like Superman, at least Batman has knowledge on his side. He knows Clark pretty well, so fighting Superman, he's got a few aces up his sleeves, as someone who is known for creating the perfect plans and for his own deductive skills. But when it comes to someone like the Reverse Flash, this is an impossibly powerful villain and someone that Batman does not know as intimately in the slightest. So what's a Bat to do? Well, mainly just stall for time. Batman uses what he knows to make a plan. He knows he can't win against Reverse Flash, he has some knowledge of how the Flash would handle a fight like this, and fortunately, he knows that his friend, the Flash, Barry Allen, will be back at the Batcave shortly, which means he really only has to survive until Barry gets back. Counting down the seconds till Barry returns, Batman simply does his best to stall and survive, knowing that the Flash can take Thawne on. Fortunately, he not only survives till then, but he also gets lucky when Barry is late, with Reverse Flash picking up the Watchman button that was in the Batcave, traveling to the other pre-New 52 reality, and ultimately getting zapped by Dr. Manhattan and killed before he could return to Batman's and the New 52 world.